Very special guest. As you all know, the theme of Rouleur Classic this year is the World Championships, and our next guest wore the rainbow bands no fewer than 3 times in a row, I should add. Please welcome to the stage Michael Rogers.
Thank you very much.
Hello.
Morning.
Michael, you're just telling me off stage that you've been in London a few days now with your daughter. How's it all going?
Yeah, we had a fantastic time. We arrived on Wednesday morning, and of course the first stop was at Legoland.
Oh, very good.
And
My sister's just been there. You might have seen her.
And we've been doing a bit of sightseeing, and we took advantage of this lovely opportunity to see London.
You've done Rouleur before?
No, it was my first time.
Ah, how are you finding it?
Well, I mean, I haven't had a big chance to look around. I only arrived half an hour ago, but we'll wander around a little bit later on.
We'll give you time. We'll give you time. So as I said, the theme this year is World Championships. So 3-time World Champion in your extensive career. What did that mean out of all of your achievements to win and to wear the rainbow bands?
Well, I guess for me, the World Championships was... when I won them for the first time was really I think it was the first time that I proved myself as a kind of a big cyclist, so to say, where I kind of started to unlock my whole career there and really understand about professional cycling and almost enter into that kind of higher echelon of the more senior riders. So, I mean, I suppose time trialing for me was my kind of trademark of my career, but something that I took on board and also started to transfer that more into stage racing. So, looking back, I won my first World Championships in 2003 now, so 15 years ago, and I was the first one to do 3 consecutive World Championships in a time trial, of course. So, back in the day, it was a special thing. And
you say it sort of launched you into that higher echelon, but you're still just a baby. You're only 23. I mean, you're still, I think, the youngest ever winner of the World Championships. Take me back to then. And obviously, you get to the age of 23 and you've worked a long time to get there. You don't become world champion easily. But you were still young. You still had a young head on your shoulders. What do you remember from that first title in particular?
Well, I mean, time trialing for me, if I maybe take a step back in my whole career and explain that, I started cycling when I was 7 years old in a little town in Australia. It was kind of on the edge of the outback. It was called Griffith, and it was it was an agricultural town, and there was a lot of Italians there had migrated out to Australia and grew tomatoes and marijuana. The
really?
Tomatoes were the official one, and
right,
then
okay.
the back
was
crop.
The cover.
That was the back crop. Was.
Did you like tomatoes, Michael? Just wondering.
So I grew up in this quite interesting kind of community of Italian cyclists, right? And and how we got started was my father, who was an engineer, is an engineer. He just recently retired, civil engineer. So he was kind of traveling through the 70s and the 80s, going through all these small regional kind of agricultural towns and setting up, canals and drainage and bridges and roads and my mother was a nurse, and they had sold the second car, and Dad purchased a bike from their local bike shop, which was run by the Italian
tomato grower,
tomato farmers. And my father, he's open to anything, and he's very, he'll try anything out. And the Italian that sold him the bike was, why don't you come down and this is a nice bike. Why don't you come down and put it to use instead of just riding to and from work? So my father went down and took part in his first race. I mean, he had no training, no nothing.
And he was racing all the Italians.
He was racing all the Italians, and started there. And my 2 elder brothers, Dean and Peter, they started cycling as well. And I come along and I was 7 and started there. But where my first time trial skills come from, because it was, as I mentioned, it was a tiny little town, and I had no one to compete against. I was 7, 8 years old. So they'd put me in with the full-grown men and adults, but they'd just start me half an hour before.
Right.
And so I was always riding on my own. And, you know, when I look back at my career, that was where my first kind of taste of time trialing and started. So
that's a really interesting psychological introduction to time trialing as well, though, because I always wonder, are you in a time trial, are you being chased? Are you chasing the clock? Are you chasing the finish line? You were literally being chased in that scenario. Did that help shape your mentality and your approach to time trialing in any way, do you think?
Well, I think as a time trial, the first thing you do when you see the start time is who's behind you.
Yeah.
So you're being chased, but you're also chasing the rider in front of you, absolutely.
And so the age of 23, I mean, it was an unusual way, I guess, to win the world title. Talk us through the time trial in 2003.
So time trial 2003 won Hamilton, Canada. I mean, Dave Miller went in and is as the favourite and absolutely crushed. It's all he won by, I think, I can't remember now, but it was a minute and a half. I was second, and Uwe Schell was a German rider. He was only finished half a second or a second behind me. And obviously Dave went through his whole case, and I was awarded the gold medal on the morning of the 2004 World Championships, which I won in my own right. So it's quite being awarded 2 World Championship jerseys in one day. I'm the only person to have that.
Quite something. What was that like, though? The emotions of that day must have been quite something. I'm talking about 2004 in particular, because you were the rightful winner of 2003, but it's a different thing, isn't it, to not receive the rainbow jersey and the gold medal on the day itself. So to get that a whole year later and then go on to race and win again.
Well, we actually had 2 ceremonies in the one day. So
both at the end of...
No, they did the first one from 2003 at 10 o'clock in the morning. It was really weird, yeah.
How did you
a surreal feeling, yeah.
How did you get your race head on after that? I mean, I guess it was a happy moment, wasn't it, receiving?
Yeah, I mean, it was a happy moment, but you know, when I look
back,
you
didn't even get to wear the rainbow jersey all year, then, did you?
Or? No, not at all. No, they only took the decision literally days before the World Championships.
So one of the greatest honours of being a world champion is wearing those rainbow bands. And
exactly.
You received them.
Exactly, yeah.
Got to ride the next race, but that could have been your last outing.
Yeah, but in all honesty, you know, I was fortunate enough to go on to win that day itself, and then the subsequent 2005 as well. So you know, I got my fair share, 2 years in there.
Yeah.
It's, you know, for most cyclists, wearing it once is an honour, and to be able to wear it for kind of 2 years in a row is a nice experience.
So how was that then when you finally got to wear the rainbow bands at the start of your next time trial following the 2005 win? That must, I mean, it was a long time coming by then, really, wasn't it?
Yeah, well, it comes with a lot of pressure because, you know, being in the World Championship jersey, you almost last in the time trial, you know, become really one of the favourites in every race, and the pressure on. And, you know, I have this one story where I think also the jersey almost humiliated me. I think it was at the 2005 World Championships, 2005 Tour de France. I just finished second in the Tour of Switzerland. I was in really good shape, but things just didn't work out that day. So I was running for Quick Step at the time, line up to Tour de France 2005. I think I was maybe about the 3rd or 4th last rider off. And World Championship, the team had painted up the car, and I was favourite to get the yellow jersey. And I had a bad day. I had a really, really bad day. I finished maybe 80th. I think Lance and Ulrich were just behind me, and they literally just caught me at the finish line. So it wasn't a great day, but you know, having the pressure of being world champion, you know, it's always on your shoulders and always in the back of your head. And to be honest, most of my kind of experiences in the world championship jersey in a time trial, I didn't win. But then again, you know, you don't win all the races you start in cycling. So, I
mean, do you understand the myth, I guess, of the curse of the rainbow bands? Then is there something to that? It's not the same for every rider, but for you, did you experience a bit of that extra pressure that maybe got in the way of just getting on with the job?
I didn't see it, and I never felt it as a curse. And I mean, time trialing is very different. I mean, the majority of the time trials you do probably come in a Grand Tour. So and towards the end of a Grand Tour, and which is a completely different cyclist. I was a pure time trialist, but if I started a time trial at the end of a Grand Tour, already with fatigue in the legs, I didn't perform nowhere near as well as I would have on a one-day time trial. Well, I came in very rested and kind of in peak condition.
So what about 2005 then? As you say, no one had won 3 world time trial titles in a row. The pressure that day must have been quite insane. Or was it? Was it kind of, did you have the pressure off in a little way because nobody had done it? Maybe there wasn't the same expectation.
I think for me going into the 2005 World Championships, it was the pressure was on in the sense that I really wanted to be that first person to get the triple crown. To add to that, things weren't going great for me. I just wasn't in shape, and I could see in my times in training that they weren't holding up to the previous years of 2003, 2004. And I'd come out of the Tour de France really fatigued. Going back to that story before, I just did not have a good tour that year, and I was really, really struggling and kind of had almost mentally given up on the season. And I think it was only 2 weeks before the World Championships I actually, started to get that traction that things were kind of coming back, and I was in very close contact with one of my good friends, Neil Stevens, who was a very acclaimed cyclist, Australian cyclist, rode through the Jalabert years and, Once and numerous other kind of high caliber teams, and he was always the Australian coach. And making sure that we were in check and in performance and in good shape, and he really started to motivate me that last 2 weeks leading in. And I think out of all my World Championships, I had less condition, but I had more motivation. I think that was, I only won it by 7 or 8 seconds, where in the past, I'd always won my World Championships with, going back to Verona in 2004, I'd won it by at least a minute. So it was only in that last, I think, quarter of the race where it was a real battle between, I think Fabian Cancellara was second. So we were kind of battling with each other, and I only made the difference on the last, 1 kilometre climb with 3 kilometres to go. So it was really down to the wire. Yeah.
It's really interesting you say that. I was going to ask you, actually, I don't know if anybody in here has tried time trialing or enjoys time trialing, but I always wonder just how much of it is physical and how much of it is mental, because in a race, on a normal road stage, you've got so much going on around you, and so many sort of second calculations, I guess, to make when it comes to when you're going to make your move and what all the other riders around you are doing. You're in such an isolated, potentially lonely place out in the road in a time trial, aren't you? How much of it is what's going on in your head as opposed to what's going on?
There's a lot, particularly right now in the current time trial state now. There's a lot of strategy goes into it. They all have their, their power meters, and a lot of the cyclists are going very much off a mathematical model, that's worked out by physiologists and coaches and a lot of smart people. But when I was winning my championships, we didn't have that information. We didn't. It was more or less you, the bike, and the clock, and it was very much went off feeling. It was just, you go over the limit for 30 seconds and then kind of feel, oh, I can't keep this up. So you back it off 1% under the limit, and you'd always play this game. That was how I played it, of just kind of going up and down, up and over that threshold, I should say. And I knew where I could make the differences in the World Championships. It was always on those false flats. I would lose time on the flats and make up a lot of time on these kind of undulating and false flat areas. So that just comes down to pacing and using your strengths to the best of your abilities.
So you mentioned power meters. It is such a raging debate, and has been for the last couple of seasons, I guess. I mean, I'm going to guess what your answer is going to be from what you've just said, but are you in favour, do you think?
I'm in favour, yeah.
Oh, right. I was going to guess completely wrong then. I'm glad I asked the question.
No.
Why?
Well, I think it becomes, I mean, the riders aren't there, this is my opinion. The riders aren't there kind of going, I'm not going to follow the leader because my computer says I can't. For me, it actually adds to the racing, and you know, there's the traditional cycling model has always been very closed, and I'm to the opinion that, you know, we should start to share that information. You know, if you look at what Velon is doing and starting to actually transmit the information out to the television and out to the public and onto the internet, then, you know, I think that's quite a good a thing for the users, you know, the everyday people watching cycling, to be able to have a bird's eye view into what's happening. And I'm sure that we're only at the start of, you know, leveraging that data even more. You know, let's look into the new generation and start to do more with that data and provide more insight to the people watching. Let's not keep cycling so closed and back in the 70s or the 80s or the 90s. Yep.
Because as you say, it's not like riders are just riding off their power meters, and yet to listen to some voices in the debate, you would think that that maybe is the case. Do you think that the importance of power meters has just been overhyped somewhat? Do you think it's a bit of a red herring?
Well, I think it's an easy thing to attack, that this is the problem of cycling. I mean, are we really sure that within cycling at the moment, power data is the biggest issue in cycling right now? I mean, I'm sure there's a lot of things we can fix up before radios, before power meters. I mean, you know, let's open that data up. Let's get it out. Let's, you know, radios. They should broadcast on TV.
Yeah.
And give people more insight. Give people more understanding about what's happening within the pro peloton. I only see the upside to that. I don't.
So not fewer race radios, just make it more exposed. I guess like a bit like Formula One, where we get to hear what they're saying.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, that's from the perspective of the teams and the riders. I think that's a very powerful, almost currency to have, because I mean, when you look at the current riders and the teams, it looks like they're becoming more and more restricted over time. And from my perspective, I'd really love to see the riders and the teams come together and say, no, you know, this is our data, and this is where some of our value is locked up. So from a commercial perspective, you know, I see that it's not going to fix cycling, but it's one small step.
Yeah, it's a nice idea. I think it's a nice thing to consider, at least in terms of innovation.
Exactly.
I mean, we're chatting time trials, but let's look at your penultimate season, and in particular the 2 stage wins at the Giro. I want to talk about the Zoncolan. I don't know if anyone here has been lucky enough to ever be at, has anyone been at the Zoncolan for a stage of the Giro? A few nodding heads. I mean, for me, it's one of the most special arenas in any sport, never mind cycling. It's so, just to be there, even thinking about it gives me goosebumps. It's wonderful. What on earth is it like to win on top of the Zoncolan?
Well, I mean, for me, it was a huge, huge surprise. I did not expect to ever win the Zoncolan. I mean, on my day, I could always perform very well in the mountains, but I was never to that level of, you know, of the Contadors or the Froomes or the modern day riders. But, you know, going back, there's you know, handful of those real kind of climber particular. And I could defend myself on the mountains, but not to the level of those guys. So there it is, yeah. About to fall off my bike there.
With exhaust.
No, it's actually so steep.
Oh, yeah.
So that's
22%, isn't it, near the top?
Yeah, 22, 23%. So you need a lot of strength just to be able to get your hands off the handlebars. Balancing. Look, that was
well, look at you, little baby face. We'll get back to Zoncolan in a minute, but look at that.
Yeah.
I tried to rock that hairstyle once, Michael. It didn't work.
Well, there's actually a bit of a story about that too, if you don't mind. The white hair was. I started doing this in about 1999. I was under 23 ranks.
Yeah.
The World Championships were in Verona, and I had a bet with one of my teammates. All right, if I dye my hair, you know, and I win, that. He had to pay me a bunch of money or something. But anyway, so I dyed my hair and finished second at the World Championships back in '99, Verona. And then I did it again for 2011, and I won.
Oh, dear.
Sorry, 2003, I eventually won. Then obviously 2004, won again. 2005, we did it.
You had to keep doing it.
obviously I'm paying the price now. It's starting to fall out now.
Forget lucky underpants. You had lucky bleached hair.
Yeah. So, but I eventually grew out of that.
Back to the Zoncolan then. Talk us through that moment.
So I'd already won a stage earlier on in the race.
The long breakaway, wasn't it? I remember, was it?
Yeah, I skipped off the front. Well, we went over a climb, and then from the breakaway, I skipped off the front on the descent and held off, a fast-coming bunch. So that was quite a nice victory. But Zoncolan, it was the penultimate stage, and the race GC was all over. So there was an opportunity to get into the breakaway, which I did with a close friend and teammate at the time, Nicholas Roach. And so once the break was formed, he dedicated himself and his ride to my, to go to the win. And I'd never been up the Zoncolan. I mean, before I had no idea about it. And
you'd never wrecked it?
No. And I'm not the kind of rider to
I guess
to study every inch of the course. I just wasn't, particularly in the last part of my career, I wasn't the one going for the win. Well and truly, before the last couple of kilometres of a climb, my job was already done. And so I hadn't really researched it at all or reckoned it whatsoever. And anyone knows the Zoncolan, there's this famous tunnel that leads kind of into this last kilometre, and just approaching this black tunnel, it's just like, what's this? I mean, I had no idea. So anyway, I come out the other...
You knew the tunnel was coming there, right?
No. Yeah. I no idea. No idea.
I love it.
And so anyway, okay, the motorbike went through, so I followed him through, and then you're right out the other side, and there's just... It's like riding into a football stadium, and I mean, I've just got goosebumps thinking about it now. I mean, it was just... The pain stopped.
Really.
And the suffering stopped, and then... I then knew that, I was going to win on one of the iconic mountains of cycling, full stop. So that was a special moment. Yeah,
I was there that day. I remember it well. It was an incredible stage.
Yeah.
If you look back on all of those special moments then, and we're talking from when you were a 7-year-old boy and then, started riding and I guess racing in Griffith and being chased by a group of sweaty, marijuana-growing Italians all the way through to the Zoncolan and your 3 world titles, what would you say, I'm sure you've thought about this before, I'm sure you've been asked it before, what would you say was either your favourite day on the bike or your most special moment, one that you will take to the grave?
I think growing up in Australia and watching, the Tour de France over the years, my stage win in 2014 Tour was probably the biggest and most memorable victory that I had. And I say that because growing up as a child, especially through the 80s, we had no access to the Tour de France or anything, not like they do now. But my mother's Dutch. Yeah, so my mother would have her family send VHS tapes, from Holland every month. So we would get,
with Flemish commentary.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, Flemish commentary. So my brothers and I, we grew up watching, racing home from school every day. Instead of going to the mall with all our friends, we'd race home and put Ninja Turtles to the side and put the Tour de France on,
Ninja Turtles, there's a memory.
And, watch the 18th stage of the 87 Tour for the 26th time. Yeah. So we used to, my brothers and I, would study all the tactics and what the sprinters were doing and how they're moving through the group. So we'd study all these kind of Tour de France and stage victories, and we knew all the towns. So we were obviously very cycling-centric family. And so growing up with that kind of whole culture of knowing, about the Tour de France at such a young age, I mean, when I finally won a stage, that was a huge, pressure outlet for me. And because I'd come so close so many times in previous tours and, had either been outwitted in the finish or didn't quite have the legs to, the condition to finish it off to win the stage. So back in 2014, especially arriving on my own and have the time to be able to celebrate it was, I think, the biggest victory in my career. Yes.
It's funny to think how much cycling in Australia even has moved on since then. And if we look at the World Championships this year, Rohan Dennis with the title, first time since you
Right.
actually were in the Rainbow Bands. What was that like as a proud Australian to see him?
It was nice, you
Yeah.
know. Rowan's been so close. The Olympic Games a couple of years ago, he broke his bike. You know, he's been winning time trials, you know, for several years at the peak of his condition. So, but he kind of been missing, I think, the experience to put it together at the World Championships, because the World Championships it's very much a different race compared to any other time trial during the year, you know.
Why?
Well, it's a good question. I mean, I picked up very early in my career that everyone seemed to perform really well, you know, all kind of the whole way through the season, all the time trialists, and they'd all kind of, a week before the World Championships, they'd all kind of hit this wall. And because it's at the later part of the season, and some people, you know, ride the condition wave, you know, from the Tour de France, and you manage that. But then everyone seemed to drop off in those kind of 10 to 7 days leading into the World Championships. And I guess I was just different. I kind of flipped. I would come out of the tour, literally have 2 weeks off the bike completely, and then start that build-up phase for the World Championships. So, I picked up on that very early in my career, and I rode that wave, and I was very successful at the World Championships, probably because of that. Yeah, I just had better timing.
I guess as well, it's as you were alluding to before, in most time trials that you race, they come in the middle of a race, and so your condition and your goals for the entire race are very, very different to that one day at the end of the season. It's an entirely different approach, isn't it, when it comes to World Championships?
It is. It's a very training-focused approach, especially now, because the old traditional lead-up races, I mean, back in the late 90s and the early 2000s, there was Grand Prix des Nations, there was 2 or 3 kind of build-up time trials that all the World Championship riders would take advantage of. Duo Norman, which was a 2-man time trial as well. Unfortunately, they've all disappeared off the calendar now, and all the riders are very much kind of going through this training focus now, which is quite a for a traditional professional cyclist, or going back, you know, 10, 15 years ago, no one really did any training, you know, because there's so much competition, so many racing, that you just go from race, recover, to the next race, recover, and then, you know, try to put this kind of black art together, you know, because it really is a black art, trying to get into a condition using racing as a form of training. So much, you know, now with, obviously we talked about the power meters earlier, and then the physiologists kind of actually now, due to power meters, actually understand what's going on, and accordingly have customized training and effort to, you know, to really hit that peak on the particular day. It's
still a relatively new thing, isn't it, to train to race as opposed to race to train. Did you specifically train for the time trial, or what did you do?
I did. Yeah, I did. As mentioned, you know, coming out of the Tour de France, I'd literally, you know, my road bike I'd put on the hook and only train on my time trial bike for you know, literally for 2 months. And for me, it was all, I mean, again, that's where I think I was able to win the World Championships, because I was very focused. You know, I just had one thing in mind, and of course, that has a knock-on effect, you know, going into the road race, because I always did 2. You know, I did the time trial, which was 3 or 4 days before the road race, and the road race, and it was always quite embarrassing to be one of the first dropped in the road race. You know, you just won the World Championship.
Yeah, but it's not at least not the just first, won the World Championship. It's okay.
Not the first to be dropped, but you know, to the caliber of rider I was just unable to compete at the level of the road race, because, you know, we're delving a little bit into details here, but they're 2 complete different energy systems. You know, when you're a time trialer and you're a road racer who's, you know, also competitive after 260 kilometers. It's a complete different paradigm. Yes.
So how's life for you now? What are you up to in retirement?
So Quite interesting, actually. I've got myself into the digital world. Together with one of the guests last night, Bjarne Riis, I'm sure he's a name quite familiar here, and his business partner, we started a virtual indoor cycling company called Virtue Go, and we're bringing together real indoor cycling and gaming, and creating a new way for people to train indoors, and it all synchronizes via the internet. A company called Virtue Go.
And so how did that come about? How's it coming along?
Well, I've always liked tinkering around with technology and computers, and when I'm back in mid-90s, I was kind of getting into computer science, and someone came up with this brilliant idea to go overseas and be a cyclist. So I jumped on that train and left my computer science to the side, and but I've always kind of kept in contact with what's going on in the computer world, and then when I had the chance to retire, I put the two together, and here we are. We're about a month away from launching company, and in that whole finance world of looking for partners and funding and real entrepreneur, I suppose.
Well, I guess you've come to the right place, haven't you, Michael?
Yes, exactly.
Right, we'll watch this space. Thank you very much indeed. Best of luck with it. Thank you for sharing your memories with us. Ladies and gentlemen, 3 times world champion, Michael Rogers.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
So we are not done there just yet with world champion time trialist, because from the 3-time world champion, in just a moment we'll be speaking to the 4-time world champion. Fabian Cancellara will be joining me on stage. Don't go anywhere.